My name is David Letwin, and this is Mohammed Nabulsi. Am I pronouncing it correctly?
Yeah.
Nabulsi and Mystique, and we're going to present this panel on false accusations of anti-Semitism against the Palestine Solidarity Movement. And I thought I would start very quickly by just reading some bios, if that's okay. I'll just read what we have on the site. So, Mystique is a human rights attorney and activist based in New York, originally from Nablus, Palestine. She is chief counsel to the Global Justice and Human Rights Law Network, the founder of the Muslim Defense Project of the National Lawyers Guild, a 15-year member of Al-Auda, New York, the Palestine Right to Return Coalition, and advisor to CARE New York and other nonprofit civil rights groups. Lamis is a part of the growing international legal movement for war crimes prosecution in the MENA region, Middle East, North Africa. Mohammed Nabulsi is a Palestinian-American student activist at the University of Texas School of Law. He is currently pursuing his legal education with an interest in human rights, civil rights, and international law. He is also a member of the Palestine Solidarity Committee, UT Austin, where he has helped organize boycott and divestment initiatives at the University of Texas, as well as within the Austin, Texas community. And my name is David Letwin. I'm a co-founder of Jews for Palestine, Palestinian Right of Return. I also work with Al-Auda New York as well. And I'm a theater artist and teacher at Arts Conservatory. Okay, so I put together this little presentation, and what I wanted to do was, this is just a poster that even though this is not a right of return panel, it always seems worth noting that right of return is at the heart of the whole issue. We'll maybe touch on that at some point. But what I wanted to do today was a couple things. I went through some example. First of all, let me say what I don't think any of the three of us are here to do today, and that is to get into an argument about whether there are anti-Semitic people in the world. That's not what this is about. Of course there are. This is a very specific thing about false accusations of anti-Semitism being used to slander and intimidate Palestine solidarity activists and, in fact, Palestinians in the national liberation struggle, right? And so I thought, and not like I don't think there'd be anybody here who would not know this distinction, but just to make it all clear, I thought I would just start with the definitions. So we're using anti-Semitism means discrimination against or prejudice or hostility towards Jews, and you know that's the correct definition because I got it out of some online dictionary, so it must be right. But if you look up and down at these dictionary sites, they all have some variation, this idea of hatred or prejudice or hostility to Jews, right? And then obviously contrasting that with anti-Zionism, opposition to the presence of a Jewish state in Palestine, and not on the basis that it's Jews who are doing it, it's on the basis that it's an apartheid, racist, dispossessing colonial regime. If Israel was a Christian crusader state, it would be exactly the same. So just drawing that little sub-distinction as well. And again, there might be other people who would say, hey, I oppose a Jewish state anywhere. That's a whole other discussion. But for the purposes of what we're talking about now, Zionism is this idea of opposition. Anti-Zionism is opposition to a Jewish state in Palestine. And that's the issue we're talking about here, how defenders and supporters and enablers of apartheid Israel are using tarring with the brush of anti-Semitism people who are fundamentally anti-Zionist. And so what I thought I would do would be two things really quickly. I wanted to go through a few articles that I found on the web that deal with these accusations in the words of Zionists themselves and sort of analyze what are they talking about, right? One might be tempted to say, in fact, I am tempted to say, why even bother to do that? I mean, it's lending legitimacy to these arguments to even examine them. But unfortunately, the reality is a lot of these arguments sound superficially plausible if you are not either sophisticated or haven't thought a lot about this issue or read a lot about this issue. And so I do think it's important to address what exactly they are talking about in the first place and use that as a basis. And then after that, I'll very quickly give a little political analysis, at least in my opinion, about what I think the significance of these accusations are. What do they mean politically? Why are they happening? And so that's what I'll do. So I found this article a couple months ago by Roger Cohen. Many of you might know him. He's one of the regular contributors, op-ed contributors to the Times. And on March 7th, he wrote an article called An Anti-Semitism of the Left. And of course, by the left, he means Palestine solidarity. And I'm not editorializing there. If you read the article, it's clear that that's what he's talking about. And so what he does is, rather than sort of build the case from his own experience, he quotes other people talking about their experiences with anti-Semitism. So I started going through some of the links that he put on his site, and the first thing he talked about was this gentleman named Alex, now I'm suddenly forgetting his last name. He was the co-president of the Oxford University Labor Club. And some of you may have heard about this. A few months ago, he resigned because he said there was so much anti-Semitism in the Oxford University Labor Club. So Roger Cohen posted a link to his Facebook page to Alex, whose last name I can't remember. I'll see it in my notes in a second. Oh, here we go. Alex Chalmers, on his Facebook page. So here's what he posted. And I'm doing a little bit of editing here, but I promise you, nothing at all substantive. This is exactly in intention what he said. And if you don't believe me, just look up his site on Facebook and you'll find it. So here's the first, he put together a number of his arguments comprised of a number of things. And here's the first thing he said, that members of the executive committee were using the word Zio a lot, right? Zio, as you may know, is short for Zionist. And he then said that this is a term, and I'm quoting now, a term for Jews usually confined to websites run by the Ku Klux Klan, which of course is ludicrous. The word Zio is in common usage, particularly in the Twitter sphere, where we're always trying to, get things fewer and fewer characters. Zio, clearly the use of the word Zio itself cannot in any credible sense be thought of as being anti-Semitic. Here's the second part of his brief. He said that members of the club were using expressions, and this is his quote, of solidarity with Hamas and explicitly defending their tactics indiscriminately murdering civilians. So this raises a couple of issues. First of all, the idea that it's anti-Semitic because you support Hamas is likewise fallacious, right? Hello, guys. Come on in. Good. You're making me feel like there's a full room. That's always exciting.
This thing is going to be...
Yeah, this thing may play. Here, I'll put it down.
No, but
the whole idea that if you support a national resistance movement with whose internal politics and sort of vision of the culture generally you may agree or disagree, the idea that that in itself makes you anti-Semitic is another fallacious argument. And again, I'll get into this more as we go along, but you will notice here, and those of you, I know you're in law school and we have a bunch of lawyers here, this facially insufficient notion in the law, right? That you have to provide examples of what you're talking about, proof of what you mean. And this is in his terms, not in words anybody else used. It conjures up images of people in the club running around going, yeah, kill indiscriminately, kill civilians indiscriminately. When in fact, nothing like that has ever been said, according to him. Meaning, he provides not a shred of evidence to suggest it's true. Or as they like to say, he's quoting himself, not the people he claims to be representing. And that's a very common tactic. I've done a lot of studying of this on my own, and I'm at pains to ever find concrete examples, meaning who said it, when did they say it, where did they say it, when most of these accusations are made. They are almost always in this kind of category. This is the third thing. A former co-chair claimed that most accusations of anti-Semitism are just the Zionist crying wolf. Now again, you may feel that's accurate, or you may feel it's not entirely accurate. It's sort of hard to understand how that in and of itself represents anti-Semitism, saying that no, Zionists are crying wolf most of the time. Again, you don't have to agree with what people are saying, but we're not talking about whether people are factually right all the time. We're talking about, does this qualify as anti-Semitism? By the definition certainly we've been using, hatred or anger towards Jewish people. And then this was the next thing he came up with. He was mad that the group that the union endorsed Israeli apartheid week over objections of Jewish students. And by the way, he described Israeli apartheid week. He said, the decision of the club to endorse a movement with a history of targeting and harassing Jewish students and inviting anti-Semitic speakers to campuses. Again, that's the extent of his evidence. He doesn't say who, where, when, what are you talking about, what's an example of what you mean. We are just supposed to accept at face value that his accusation that these things happen means ipso facto that they have happened, right? And the totality, and that was the 4 points he raised in his post, that led him to conclude a large proportion of both OULC, Oxford University Labor Club, and the student left in Oxford more generally have some kind of problem with Jews, and that's sort of become a buzzword now in England, which I'll get to in a second, you may know that that's what they're saying about the Labour Party. They have some kind of problems with Jews. And I would suggest there is not a shred of evidence to support that accusation. It is nothing more than one day. He may genuinely believe it to be true. That may very well be the case. But he has not provided any meaningful evidence to suggest anything other than anti-Zionism. Then, one of the other things that Roger Cohen linked to was this article in the Washington Post by David Bernstein, "The Holocaust as White-on-White Crime and Other Signs of Intellectual Decay." And by intellectual decay, once again, what he means when you read the article is the Palestine Solidarity Movement. It's limited to that. They're not interested in attacking right-wing and anti-Semites. It's all focused on Palestine solidarity. And the white-on-white crime was also referenced in Roger Cohen's article, and it refers to an alumna from Oberlin named Isabel Storch Sherrill, who similarly posted on her Facebook page what she called as a warning rant alert. And she then went on to describe 18 incidents that had happened at Oberlin that were examples of anti-Semitism. I'm not going to go through all of them, don't worry. But we're going to go through a couple of them to see, well, where do these stand in our analysis, our critical analysis of these statements. So let's take a look at a couple of these really quickly. So she says, the multiple times the Holocaust, by the way, these are verbatim from her post. The multiple times the Holocaust was referred to as white-on-white crime by my people of color peers and hip white Jewish peers, right? So again, one might well ask, what does someone saying the Holocaust was white-on-white crime have to do with anti-Semitism? Again, you may think that's an effective way of talking about the Holocaust. You may think it's a ridiculous way of talking about the Holocaust. But in what sense does it provide any evidence of anti-Semitism? And also note that both Bernstein and Cohen neglected to mention the part about Jewish students saying it. If you just read the article in the Times and the Washington Post, you would have no idea. It's only when you actually go dig through the links and find out that it was her Jewish peers. So she seems more upset with her Jewish anti-Zionist peers than anything else. Then the fact that so many Jewish students are bullied into silence, whether it's about their own ethnic identity, their relationship to Israel, or their concern about anti-Semitism in general / on campus. Again, my reaction is names and dates, please. What are you talking about? Who are you talking about? And what can we conclude from the ongoing, consistent lack of any corroborative support for these kind of charges? And there's this one. The intense and unrelenting vilification of Israel, out of proportion to any other nation on the planet where terrible shit happens. People literally refusing to talk to me because I identify as a Zionist. Well, she herself has hit on the key issue. I mean, for the second sentence. She's a Zionist, and people don't want to talk to her because of that. I mean, that should put to end this entire discussion on one level. People are rejecting you because of your politics, not because of your Jewish identity. Again, as she herself says, later in her rant, she does claim that someone came up to her, she says, someone found out I was Jewish and said, you should be ashamed for what Israel is doing. Again, no names, no dates, no context. Did this happen at an event where she was holding an Israeli flag? Was it a pro-Israel event and somebody might have said that to her? Again, we could debate whether that's collective punishment, whether you shouldn't talk to Jewish people that way. That's a separate discussion. But again, the fact that she's rejected because she's a Zionist pretty much summarizes the whole argument in her own words. And I just wanted to briefly touch on this first thing, this whole business that I'm sure many of you, don't know how many of you regard yourselves as anti-Zionist, but if you are anti-Zionist, you are constantly being told, why are you always talking about Israel? Terrible things happen everywhere. Worse things happen everywhere, right? And of course, that's an argument that in my experience, I've only heard Zionists make in defense of Israel. I've never heard anybody say, don't help that person who's being beaten and robbed of his iPhone right now. Because come on, man, there are children being sold into slavery, sex slavery in some places, and there are people being beheaded in Saudi Arabia. No one would ever make that argument and then say, so therefore, I'm not going to help you because you're not at the same time pointing out that the same or worse is happening elsewhere. To me, this is the argument of people who have at their last argument of last resort. They cannot come up with a credible defense for an apartheid regime. And they have nothing left to say other than, yeah, well, other people do bad things too. And again, for any of you who are lawyers, I leave it to you to explain how well that would go over in any court of criminal law if you said, yeah, I did terrible things, but so did other people. Then, there's a couple more here real quick. When I overheard someone say Islamophobia is like the anti-Semitism of our time, as if anti-Semitism is over, started and ended with the Holocaust, has been replaced by anti-Muslim racism. I mean, again, what is anti-Semitic about saying, boy, I see all this Islamophobia going on, and that seems to have become far more widespread in the culture than anti-Semitism is at this point in time. That's really what people mean when they say that. It doesn't mean they're saying nobody anywhere is anti-Semitic. It means, wow, there's been a shift. Where it used to be, Jews seem to be mainly targeted for that kind of talk. Now it's overwhelmingly directed at Muslims. And in fact, I found out something very interesting. This is a couple of years ago. I wonder if it's still up there. But there's a site in England, a group in England called the, what's the big right-wing neo-Nazi group there? The English... No, not that. What?
For Britain First?
No, English...
English Defense League?
English Defense League, thank you. I went to their website, and they had a post on their front page of their website saying, we were wrong. It's not the Jews. They're not the problem. It's Muslims. And then they went on to say, we are the biggest supporters of Israel because we want the same thing they want. We want a racially pure England. They want a racially pure Israel. Again, I've kicked myself for not having taken a screenshot of that and saved that for later use. I'll try and dig that up if I can as well. What's that? The English Defense League, the EDL. And then this is the last thing she said. That time, again, that time, that doesn't have a date or a place or any other corroborative elements. Someone posted flyers depicting the Israeli flag with a swastika, replacing the Star of David, and a derogatory slur for Jews as a caption. Now again, talk about facially insufficient. I mean, what slur are you talking about? I mean, if it's a slur, put it up there so people can see exactly what you're even talking about in the first place. It's not even mentioned. For all we know, she's talking about Zio. I mean, I don't mean to sound, petulant or dismissive. But again, the lack of any meaningful evidence, through which rational people could examine the truth of her charge. Now, this business about the swastika and the Israeli flag, I know there's a lot of discussion about all that. Some people have the view that, look, that's not efficacious. It raises more problems than it solves. That's a whole separate issue about whether it's efficacious to do it. But how it is that using Nazism as a baseline of evil and comparing other things to that evil, how that constitutes anti-Semitism is not at all clear to me. And I'm not being facetious. If it is clear to you, please raise it in the question. And by the way, if you think I've misanalyzed any of these, I'd be very glad to hear anybody share their insights into the meaning of these comments. So this constituted, there are 12 more things that she raised. Again, they are all nearly identical to this. The only reason I'm not showing them is just to save time. You can find out about it on the web yourself. And the reason I'm showing these is that they're not idiosyncratic. They're not just, these two particular people. They are completely consistent with the way anti-Zionists handle these accusations of anti-Semitism globally, as far as I can tell. That overwhelmingly, it's done without corroborative evidence. You are merely meant to believe the accusation because they say it's to be true. And when they do provide evidence, in other words, when they actually do show stuff that's being said, it is manifestly not anti-Semitic. And the only stuff that is anti-Semitic, they never show evidence that it's actually happened in the first place. So that, just to transition into my closing little portion here, to talk about what does it all mean? I mean, why is this happening? Why is it spreading around, this charge and this accusation? And again, let's start from the premise that a lot of people who make these accusations genuinely believe them to be true. I mean, we can't think of a world in which everybody is sitting around twirling their mustache, thinking, how can I be evil? No, a lot of people probably believe this to be the case. But putting that to one side, it seems to me there are several key issues going on here. The first is that this charge of anti-Semitism distracts, as they like to say now, pivots from the reality of the racist apartheid regime, the Zionist regime. It pivots attention away from that. And the actual demands of the at this point, most prominent representative of the liberation struggle, the BDS movement. The three demands being the end of the '67 occupation and the disassembling of the apartheid wall, the right of return for Palestinian refugees, and full equality in Israel. Full equality for Palestinians with Israeli citizenship. And it's to pivot away from both of those things. They don't want to focus on the reality of Zionism as an apartheid regime, and they don't really want to focus on what BDS is actually saying. I don't know how many of you know this, but there's this spreading state initiatives, anti-BDS initiatives, under the rubric of this broader umbrella called the 2016 Anti-BDS Initiative that's been launched by some senators and congressmen. And it's acting as an umbrella group for city and state initiatives. There have now been a mess of these initiatives, none of which, contrary to what you might have heard, they don't criminalize BDS. They just say that the state should have no business with companies that follow BDS, right? Should not have any interaction with them. But what's interesting, if you read the text of all these resolutions, none of them mention what BDS demands. They don't say, well, we've got to stop this thing. Because look, these people are talking about full equality. And they're talking about refugee rights. And they're talking about ending a military occupation. No, they can't do that. Because if they actually put the BDS demands into the text of the bills would be self-evidently stupid. And the only way they can make them work is by denying the truth of what BDS is about. So the accusation of anti-Semitism serves that function. It also serves an important function for the state of Israel, which is obsessed with getting Jewish immigration. There's what they call, I'm sure you've all heard this term, the demographic time bomb. What they mean by that is that at some point there are going to be more Palestinians in 48 Palestine than there are going to be Jews. And that means the end of the Jewish state. As the Israelis are only too happy to tell you, if you ask them. And so one of their strategies has been to increase immigration to Israel. The birth rates for Palestinians is much higher than for Jewish families. They even set up a council called the Demography Council. They set it up, they disbanded it, they set it up again. I don't know if it's running now, but the main focus of the Demography Council was to persuade Jewish families to have more children, so there'd be more Jews than Palestinians. One of the key tactics to encourage immigration is to put in the minds of Jewish people around the world that there's prevalent anti-Semitism and that their lives are at stake. And so whenever an anti-Semitic episode does arise, or whenever Jews are killed in not even an anti-Semitic episode, it is spun as such to provoke fear and anxiety. And I know that happened in France. There was an exodus of a certain number of members of the Jewish community during the attacks there last year, stoked and encouraged by Israel. Right? And also, parenthetically, it allows them to justify the whole premise of the Jewish state. See, we have to have this place. Look at all this horrible stuff that's happening out there. Then it seems to me the third purpose is to intimidate and silence opposition to this vital imperial U.S. watchdog state. Right? The U.S. has an enormous stake in Israel defending its imperial interests. And so the charge of anti-Semitism is about silencing those, in particular Palestinians, who speak out and speak for their rights. And that's a way of silencing what they see is a huge threat, which is a liberation movement of indigenous people, because that spells disaster for imperialism. So it serves that function. And then the fourth thing, it seems to me, is to undermine any perceived radical resistance to the status quo, targets of opportunity. And I think that's what we're seeing in Britain right now. I don't think it's really even about defending Israel. It's about this perceived radical, Jeremy Corbyn, whatever your views about him. What? Oh, I thought that was me. He's perceived as a radical, and so the right wing is going after him, and just by target of opportunity, the tactic they're using to do it is the charge of anti-Semitism. And I don't know how many of you follow this, but some of it was because one of his biggest supporters, Ken Livingstone, who used to be the mayor of London and is now a suspended member of parliament, said this in an interview. When Hitler won his election in 1932, his policy then was that Jews should be moved to Israel. He was supporting Zionism before he went mad and ended up killing 6 million Jews. Now, a lot of people pointed out this is not the way you'd want to say it, maybe. And there's some factual mistakes there. There wasn't an Israel in 1932 and so on and so forth. It's also inaccurate to paint the image that Hitler was a positive supporter of Zionism. He wasn't. But as Jonathan Cook, some of you may know, the journalist in Nazareth, pointed out, support also has another meaning. It means enabling. As he said, if you say to somebody, don't lend Jim $50, you're just supporting his drug habit. Doesn't mean you like the drug habit. It means you're enabling it, right? And in that sense, it is somewhat accurate to say that, it is accurate to say the Nazis enabled Zionism through the Havara transfer agreement, which I won't go into today. So again, this got him in hot water. The right wing jumped on this, including the right wing of the Labour Party, the Blairites, and they're going after him. And then there was this. A little while ago, someone trolled back and found from 2014 on Facebook, August 2014, a post from Naz Shah, who was another Labour Party person, and she had posted this poster that she saw on another site, Solution for the Israel-Palestine Conflict, and there you see it's a little bleached out here, but that's the United States, and it's put Israel, in the center of the United States. And then it has a list of clearly ironical demands, benefits that would be gained by this, most of which, as Jonathan Cook pointed out when he analyzed this, really attack the United States more than Jews at all, or even Israel. And again, some people might look at that and go, look, this is not the most efficacious way of talking about this issue. I mean, to me personally, the idea that we should move Israel to another place, that doesn't seem to be the answer, right? But clearly, this is not proposing that seriously. So, okay, we can have a debate among us of whether we like this poster or don't like, but there's nothing anti-Semitic about it. Yet she has been forced to apologize repeatedly over and over and over again. And again, that falls into this last target of opportunity. How can the right wing smash anybody that they think presents a threat to the status quo? And then I'll just end today by saying that there's obviously a huge history of anti-Semitism in the West. But if anybody today is responsible for stoking the flames of it, it's Israel itself. It's Zionism itself. Both in terms of the fact that it, as an ideology, it buys into the deeply anti-Semitic idea that Jews don't belong with anybody else, that they can only realize themselves by going to a separate place. That's not idiosyncratic to Zionism. It's really a reflection of 19th century romantic notions of nation states based on ethnic purity. And it is that when you see Benjamin Netanyahu justify the so-called nationality bill by saying this, he referred to Israel as the nation of one people only, the Jewish people, and of no other people. Putting aside the crime of the Nakba and the refugees, he's just said that 21% of the population of Israel, the state is not for them, based on their identity. And when you say that, and he doesn't say he's doing it in the name of Zionism, he's saying he's doing it in the name of all Jewish people everywhere, then you can't wonder when some people respond with language that makes you sort of go, oh gee, could that be borderline anti-Semitic? In other words, it seems to me full blame, not full blame, a huge percentage of the blame rests on the apartheid state of Israel itself. And that is why we at Jews for Palestinian Right of Return say anti-Zionism isn't anti-Semitic, it's anti-racist. Thanks very much.